Hey folks, welcome to a brief history of the spice trade. I've put together a bit of a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to try and record my notes as I would when speaking to you and delivering this lesson in class. And beginning with Marco Polo's travels to China during the Dark Ages, economic centers have grown up around the world's trade based on that. So if you look at the map, this red route here is what was known as the Silk Road, and I'll get into that more in a moment. But that's kind of where Marco Polo was one of the early explorers who went to Asia from Europe. He was an Italian merchant, and this was back in the 13th and 14th centuries. This happened, so we're talking about centuries and centuries ago. But he came back and described to Europeans what was then really mysterious culture and inner workings of the Eastern world and that other end of the land. And so he brought back a lot of kind of the wonder and mystery from the Mongol Empire and the Yuan dynasty in China. And so this was really the Europeans' first look into areas like India, Japanese, and other Asian cultures. The foods in Asia were not only different to those in Europe, but their flavor was enhanced by using seasonings that Europeans had never tasted before. And so those flavorings became highly coveted and very, very valuable back in Europe. And so this led to the development of what is called the Silk Road. And it was a network of trade routes that connected east to west from as far back as the early 2nd century BCE to the 18th century CE. They exchanged not only silks, which the route is named after, but also other goods like science, technology, even ideas like religion were carried through this way. And of course, spices. So as explorers introduced new foods and spices to Europe, the trade back and forth with Asian nations flourished. Now the Silk Road is this red route up here, and you can see how it travels from east to west and back and forth again, all by land, keeping it a very, relatively safe and steady and known way of traveling. Historically, the cities of Damascus, Rome, and Athens grew up around the spice trade, and so they became major epicenters during the medieval period, rich with all of the trade that they had accomplished. And so you have Syria over here at the east end of the Mediterranean. You have Athens further in at the end of Greece, and then finally at the western or northwestern end of the Mediterranean Sea, you have Rome. And there was a lot of technology, colonialism, and mercantilism that developed during this age now being 14th century to about 18th century, and it's a long period of what's called the Age of Discovery or Age of Exploration, because this Silk Road that had been their way of transporting goods back and forth, cultural goods, technological goods, everything from tea to gunpowder to religion, it became too dangerous. They were carrying viruses and plagues back and forth with them. They were traveling through areas of warfare between various empires, and there were also many bandits. What happened was a lot of people, or criminals, recognized the value of goods going back on these usual routes. And there was no e-transfers, there wasn't even a banking system. So everyone had to carry with them the goods that they were going to exchange. This meant that if they needed that much gold, they were carrying that much gold. And then if they were carrying back that value in gunpowder, they were carrying it all. And the bandits knew this. So it became far too dangerous for people to transport goods back and forth. Now, necessity is the mother of all invention, so as they necessitated a new route, they developed. And so there was development of technology, particularly for seafaring, everything from navigation to tools and applying the trade of things like gunpowder to their weaponry on their ships. It also brought development of colonialism, which is political control of a new land, and so exploiting that new land economically. For example, the Europeans going over and claiming lands in North America or Africa, and we'll get into those in a moment, as well as mercantilism, which is basically an early form of capitalism. It's the idea of exchanging goods to earn a profit, and eventually led to the development of currency as we know it today. So this discovery down here, where you see the sea routes, was all pushed forward by the spice trade. A lot of places were using spices as currencies, and they were also finding that they could exchange other goods, other ideas, and discover new lands, so to speak. Now, hopefully you could hear the bunny ears in my words discover, because of course those lands were usually inhabited already, and they kind of saw it as invaders coming to come and exploit their lands. So it all depends who you ask in the situation, but that's colonialism for you. All that to say that there was a high value in these trade routes, in the spices, and in their trade. So as I was saying, these explorers were going out looking for routes from Europe eastward to India and China. And then some of them, if I can get a different color here, found that they could make their way through these channels and get oh so far. But then they had the idea of maybe going the other way and heading westward in hopes that they would come full circle back around to their destination in the Far East. What they didn't realize was that there was this whole mass of land here that we know as the Americas that was kind of in their way. So the Europeans discovered the Americas while attempting to find an alternate, safer route to the spice centers in the Far East. Again, that idea of discovery is connected to lands that were already inhabited by people and that were different than what the Europeans had known and were used to, and therefore saw them as uncivilized, therefore thought with good intention that they were then helping the peoples of these lands and helping them mature, civilize, and develop as nations. Unfortunately, what they did was actually everything they were avoiding on that Silk Route back over here, and they became the ones that were bringing the plague and the warfare over to these new worlds. But landing in the Americas meant two things. One, that they had a whole new set of land to explore and exploit for whatever goods they found there. And they also had a whole new set of people to sell their goods to. And so everything they could bring from the Silk Road or the trade eastward, they could also bring back westward. So they had a new market and a new set of resources. So it went both ways, and some definitely profited more than others. But ultimately, this gives you a perspective on how the spices traveled around the world, how they got from one place to the other, how they came to be used in a variety of different places. And India and China are still the spice centers of the world today. We just have a much more global market where we know where they come from, we know where we get them and where we use them most, but it's important to understand where that all started. If we look at the major centers of food trade today, we're going to focus on 3 regions. So not specifically countries, because those are just political lines in the land, but anywhere where you have a geography that is very common, a climate, and earth and soil types, weather patterns that are all very similar, you're going to produce similar foods and have slight variations in your culture, but a very common cuisine overall. So specifically looking at herbs and spices, we're going to look at where Some of them originated. So this is where they are native species, where they were kind of born. So some continue to be used regularly in their native lands. Other ones are now more commonly associated with other regional cuisines around the world. And that's, again, thanks to the globalization and evolution of trade and cuisine. So first of all, we have the Asian natives, and some of these go back to even before the Common Era, okay, before the year 0 as we know it today. And so things like cardamom, ginger, cinnamon, turmeric, black pepper, cloves, mace, nutmeg, tarragon, they are all ones that came from the Far East, okay, what we know as China, Japan, India, etc. today. Then we have the Mediterranean area natives. We looked at the map earlier and we saw where the Mediterranean Sea was between Southern Europe and Northern Africa. And that's really a hub area between East and West. And now historically you understand why. Originally in this area were things like marjoram, oregano, mint, rosemary, and the list you see on there. And so even though we see a lot of those around the world today, this is where they originated. This is where they are native to. And so it means that the people in the Mediterranean region first brought these out elsewhere and have since become popularized in other parts of the world. Finally, we have the New World natives. And now you understand why the Americas are known as the New World. So these were only imported into Europe and then the Far East in the 15th and 16th centuries as a result of that discovery of the Americas. There's not a lot that was here that was native to the Americas and brought over, not already found elsewhere, but things like allspice, which is from down in the Caribbean area, capsicum peppers, which are the basic sweet bell peppers that we know of today, and vanilla are some major examples of worldwide commonly used herbs and spices that originated in this new world. So overall, you now have a view of the history of some herbs and spices, where they came from, how they came to be there. And of course, there's plenty more of this if you ever want to look into it. I may have done entire papers on this in university. This is my brief overview for you. Hopefully it's been enlightening.